Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Beechwood Organization, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, the Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns & Gian Tomasi, Grubb & Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa & Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Markham LLP, Marcus Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Margolin Weiner & Evans LLP, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Moynihan Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides & Associates, Sterling & Sterling, Urban American, the Wickoff Group.
People are involved with the city of New York. People are involved with leasing and sales, but very few people have done 50 million square feet of sales and leasing over their career. I'm fortunate today to have Robert Alexander, the chairman of the Tri-State Region of C.B.R.E. Richard Ellis.
Good morning, and I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. So you were born in Queens. Then your parents moved out to Hempstead, right?
Hempstead, Long Island, yep.
And interesting, in Hempstead, when you went to public school, you went to what?
Fulton Street School in Hempstead.
And in Fulton Street School, one of your classmates was?
David Patterson.
And then you went to Mary Regina High School?
Mary Regina High School in Uniondale, which is now Bishop Kellenberg.
And when you were at Mary Regina, was there any idea that you were going to be involved? Your dad was an attorney, let him rest in peace. But did you think you were going to be involved with any aspect of real estate?
No, no clue whatsoever. I was involved in sports, girls, and maybe a little bit of academics.
Right, a little football, a little basketball.
Correct.
And then you decided to go up to Niagara University.
Yes.
Upstate, a very warm area.
Very warm.
Very warm. And you went to Niagara, and at Niagara, where you're a trustee today, Niagara, what were you studying for?
Niagara was business administration. So I've got a bachelor's of science in business admin.
Now, while you were at Niagara, you also played a little basketball.
Played a little basketball for the first couple of years.
And then the summers, what were you doing? You did a lifeguard. You did.
We summers did lifeguarding, and then I went on a great career path of being a garbage man for the last couple of years.
Which was great because you were able to work as long as you took care of the work. You could finish early.
You could finish early.
So
you're allowed to run the route versus walking the route, which is what the union guys did.
So now you graduate. What do you decide you're going to do?
Well, when I first graduated, I was drawn towards sales. So we started out in Buffalo, really hired right after graduation with a company called W.R. Grace, a division of W.R. Grace, which sold industrial chemicals. And I opened up a new territory in Niagara Falls, lo and behold. That went on for about a year. It was very interesting work. You had to be somewhat mechanically inclined as well as being a salesperson, calling on such places as the GM auto plants, giant restaurants, country clubs, the whole gamut. But it was a great experience. Buffalo at the time had, during the course of my tenure at Niagara, the population had declined 20%. It didn't seem to me that it was an opportune area to grow and have a career. From my perspective, I'm sure different people thought different things. it was time to relocate back to New York after a year.
So how did you find the job with the tool company?
I was fortunate enough to have one of my roommates already working at Fuller Tool Company in Whitestone, Queens. He called me. We had been in touch about an opportunity, an opening, if you will. I went down, interviewed, got the position, and that entailed national sales, wholesaling tools.
So you had the tools in the back of the car?
Well, no. What we did is we ran various programs, which these programs had giant display vans. So we would fly into different cities, pick up the display vans, pick up the indigenous salespeople for the area, the True Value chain salesperson, the Ace Hardware chain salesperson, and bring those people along with us, and we'd make one-stop sales at all the various hardware department stores or whatever were in the geographic area that we were working. But the beauty of it was, when I first started, my first sales call, which was January 4th, I was supposed to be on a Monday in a place called Caribou, Maine. It was literally the first week in January. I flew into Portland, and I didn't really check a map beforehand. I had a map with me. Landed at Portland at 9 o'clock at night and realized that at 6 in the morning I had to meet the salesman, and that Caribou was an 8-hour drive. And I proceeded to get in that van and drive 8 hours straight north where the snow was over the top of telephone poles. So the good news was it's very hard to go off the road because when you skidded, you slammed from side to side on the snow walls. Nonetheless, made it there at 5:45, got exactly 22 minutes of sleep, and the salesman was knocking on the door because time was money for these guys. They allocated a day for me. They went out. They were paid on a commission basis by my company, and they weren't kidding around. It was time to eat was about 10 minutes.
So it's a year and a half, right? You spend about a year and a half. You say enough of this traveling around the country and different regions.
Right.
And something interesting happens. One of your dad's friends, somebody who worked with him, who had just come back from Vietnam, he was a ranger. Tell me about him.
A gentleman by the name of Bill Butler. And Bill Butler was enrolled in Hofstra University, played football for Hofstra University, also was a Vietnam vet, Army Ranger, et cetera, had embarked upon and was having a very successful career with a gentleman by the name of Matt Stakem. I think most of the industry knows who Matt Stakem was. As a matter of fact, his daughter, Darcy Stakem, is the head of my capital markets group and is hugely successful, along with her sister Tara, who's hugely successful over at Cushman & Wakefield. Nonetheless, Bill got me very interested in commercial real estate. Exciting, high compensation if you're successful, all the aspects of a competitive situation as evidenced by some of the sports that I had played in the past.
Right, so you play basketball and football, you were sales, so you had competitive over here.
Right.
You had no idea what the real estate business was.
Exactly.
And so here's this guy, Alexander, is looking for a job, and you met the Stakems, but Cushman & Wakefield said, hey kid, we don't want you.
You have no experience. We only hire people with experience. Go get some experience and come back and see us. So that embarked on a 4-month process by which I read the papers, canvassed the papers, got to know some of the players in there for the 4 rent signs. One of them happened to be Levinson, Dave Levinson, who was over at Williams at the time. Next thing you know, I see an ad show up. He's looking for a salesperson. So I pounded away.
You told me you made like 60 phone calls?
Oh, yeah. Well, befriended his assistant, Maureen, who was good enough eventually to get me on the docket.
Is that the same Maureen who's still with him today?
No. Maureen went in another direction probably 10 years into the tenure. But P.S., we were a successful match. I got in to meet David. We talked, and the rest is history.
Yeah, but David then says, hey, kid, here, I'll give you a desk, I'll give you a phone, and go get some deals, right?
Go get some deals. But, look, at the end of the day, David is a very able, smart man, and he knew that in order for me to be successful, I had to have some basic grounding in exactly what I was selling. I'm a very good salesman, but I got to know, you have to know your product.
So the first deal that really, the deal that helped make you was this deal with fiber optics?
Well, we had a couple of scenarios that happened in the early 80s that were very fortuitous for my career. and for our team. One was the fiber optic deal, which was the beginning of fiber optics. I had canvassed the paper and read that Southern New England Telephone and CSX Railroad had formed a joint venture. Now, I'm smart enough to know when you have a joint venture that perhaps there's a ability for two companies to combine certain divisions, which would mean that real estate should be involved. In a call to Southern New England Telephone, the gentleman on the other end, Dick Davis, God bless him, said to me, funny that you called. We are very interested in opening a fiber optic, which nobody knew what fiber optic was at the time.
I think they called it dark cable.
It was dark cable, or yeah. And the gentleman explained to me, we have a specific site that we're interested in, and that would be 60 Hudson Street. So I said, funny, lo and behold, one of the partners of the company, Bob Carmel, along with his two partners, Stanley Stahl and Joe Comras, has just bought 60 Hudson Street for $22 million. So net, we go down there. Now, 60 Hudson Street was the former headquarters of Western Union. The beauty of 60 Hudson, it had piping into it from every place in the country. So when you're wiring fiber optic, now, by the way, this is unknown to the Carmels, Stahl, Comras, Alexander, Levinson. No one knows anything, except for, of course, the joint venture, because the communications company understands the fiber optic runs everywhere. They get a look at the operation there. They get a look at the building and the access that they have to all of Manhattan, New Jersey, and everywhere else. They take a lease for 200,000 feet for 20 years. Starting rent, $28 a foot. So I think Bob, rest his soul, and Stanley, rest his soul, and Joe, I'm not sure where Joe is, were extremely happy because they bought a 1 million square foot building for $22 a foot, and their first 200,000 foot lease was at $28 a foot, with escalations going on for 20 years. And that was our first big play.
But then you had another big play, and you know, people today know about MTV. They know about it because of a number of the shows. They know about it because, and few people realize that, you know, the Bankers Trust Company, which was acquired by Deutsche Bank, was originally at 1776 Broadway.
Yep.
And what happens over there?
Well, I'll tell you, we were on an assignment. Dave Levinson, Brian Given, and Brian Given's a 30-year man over at Williams, well, I'm not sure what the name is now, but Williams Real Estate, and myself were working on a project to sublease for Bankers Trust approximately 220,000 feet, actually working with a gentleman called David Wiener, who was just a terrific guy. He's retired. He went over to Deutsche Bank. We did work with him over there as well. But net, Justin Wimpheimer, I happened to call, who I know, who was the head of real estate for Warner Brothers, says, I'll come over and take a look at the space. Maybe I've got an interest. Would you say $25 a foot? Let me come over. We come over, we're touring the space. He goes, I think I need half or 3/4 of it. I inquired why. He said, well, we've got a division. We just started it. It's probably not going to go anywhere, and we'll probably end up subleasing the space, but it's politically motivated. I've got to find some space. And I asked him what the name of the entity was, and he said, no, it's MTV. It's crazy. It has something to do with music and videos at the same time. Well, the rest is history there. They took the sublease, they took the rest of the space, and they just exploded.
So now it's 1986, 1987, right?
Right.
You've had some great years at Williams, you and David working together as a partnership.
Yep.
David had joined the legendary Edward S. Gordon.
David got recruited over there, I believe, in 87.
87,
Yep.
as David said to me, he got a big sign-up bonus, got a good deal to go over there, and then he says, let me bring my colleague in crime, right?
Yep.
So you go over there, and this is where, you know, you are the chairman of the Tri-State Region at C.B.R.E. Richard Ellis, which is the company which became over there. And you've had some interesting transactions. I mean, let's talk about some of them. I mean, let's talk about, you know, the Jpmorgan, you know, the Chase, going over those deals over the years.
Well, to give you a quick chronology, I was fortunate when I went over there to be able to work directly with Eddie Gordon and Marty Turchin. And I look at those two gentlemen, and God rest Eddie's soul, I was able to bring my game. David was terrific, but Marty and Ed brought me to a whole nother level of
and
expertise.
also the creation of the consulting department.
The consulting group was there. It was a whole nother level of business. It was really, really terrific. It took a couple of years to get a handle on. I was fortunate enough to go over there and work on, I identified the United Technologies headquarters.
Right, the Hartford deal.
And Eddie, of course, who had contacts everywhere, was able to call George David. And George and John Rolls, who later went to Deutsche Bank, were the gentlemen that hired us to do that project for them. That started right when I went over there in '88. In 1990, Eddie and Marty put me on the AT&T team.
Right, that was the
550 Madison disposition to Sony, who was also represented by our firm by a woman by the name of Carol Nelson and Marty Turchin and Mary Ann Ty. So it was a very interesting transaction.
Right,
for an entire
AT&T
building.
had built that building.
Yep.
And then they didn't really need the space. You were involved with...
Exactly. And they decided to it was a signature construction program that they did in all the major cities around the country. It was a fantastic, and still is a fantastic building. It didn't really suit their corporate needs. Basking Ridge was their headquarters. So we worked through that. Fortunate enough 2 years later to represent Bank of America when they bought Security Pacific. That was 1994. We did a 700,000 foot consolidation. And the interesting aspect about that and why I bring that up is 400,000 of that was a consolidation into One World Trade Center. During the course of that consolidation, the course of that lease, they had the first terrorist explosion. And we were able to work as a team with Charlie Makish, who was the director of the Port Authority. Chris Ward was involved, the current director. And at that time, it was Stanley Bresnoff, who was the executive director. And with also Mario Cuomo, who was the governor of New York, and Rich Rosenberg, who was the chairman and CEO of Bank of America at the time. And between the group, because we had this lease out for signature, the bank pulled back. They said, we don't think we can sign this lease. We're really worried about security. We had a series of meetings over a period of 4 or 5 weeks. The deal was resurrected. The bank made the commitment to go forward on the 400,000 feet. Port Authority took a giant newspaper ad out thanking Rich Rosenberg, thanking Mario Cuomo, thanking everyone, because it really stabilized the trade centers at that point. And that was another signature move that was done that I really am very proud of. And Charlie Makish actually was good enough to award us 600,000 feet of space that Deloitte moved out of during the course of that event.
Right, they moved out of the trade center, they moved across the street.
Exactly. And we were charged with leasing up that 600,000 feet. So that was sort of a mid-90s crucible for us.
Now what's interesting is, you know, later on in your career, near the bombing of the Trade Center, you were involved with Lehman Brothers.
Yes, sir.
So let's talk about that, because it really, you know, it's downtown also, it's 9/11, it, you know, it relates.
You wonder what follows you around. But yes, we had gotten involved with Lehman Brothers in 1998. They had spun off from American Express. When they were with American Express, it was Shearson Lehman. It became Lehman Brothers, the original name from the 1800s, in 1996. Dick Fold, chairman CEO. We got involved, let's call it around 98, and our job was to help them plan their expansion. They were in Three World Financial Center. They had a 1 million square foot condo. Amex had the 1.2 million up top in the building. They needed more space. They needed to reconfigure what they had. Net, over the course between 98 and 2000, pre-9/11, we created a campus, a Lehman campus. And that campus included One World Trade Center for about 150,000 feet for their ops. It also included taking a forward lease of 700,000 feet in One World Financial, which was going to serve as their corporate headquarters, and we were going to keep the big floor plates at Three World for trading. Right? So that would have been the trading. Headquarters corporate would have been over at One World Financial. We finished, and this was a future commitment 3 years out. We finished that whole project. Literally 6 months later, 9/11 occurs, and all bets were off. And we had to go into scramble mode. That was just, we never left the city for almost a month and a half. We stayed at hotels, the Lehman team and us, and we formulated a plan and executed a plan literally within 4 or 5 weeks to rehouse almost 8,000 workers, which culminated in a deal within 30 days after that. Daytech in Jersey City for 400,000 feet, brand new building, a 450,000 foot lease at 399 Park, and the purchase from Morgan Stanley of 745 7th Avenue. And all those were executed simultaneously over a 60, 90-day period, and that was the anchor for Lehman in Midtown.
Now let's talk about another financial service company that you've been very involved with, Chase, Jpmorgan, Deutsche Bank. Let's go in a little bit about that.
Well, we were hired, and again, this was pre 9/11 by Jpmorgan also to rationalize. It wasn't Jpmorgan; it was Chase Manhattan Bank, and a gentleman by the name of Mark Shapiro, who was the vice chairman, and Charles Makish, who had left the Port Authority and was now the executive vice president for business and real estate for Jpmorgan Chase. They had 34,000 employees. They felt that a lot of the businesses that were in the Tri-State area, it was about 8 million square feet, were businesses that probably needed to be nearshored to other parts of the country, lower occupancy costs and lower salaries. But they wanted to get it organized into a study, and we went to work. And once again, my exemplary consulting department, and a lot of this work that I'm describing to you, I like to sit here and try to take credit for it. The fact of the matter is, we have a monster team of the most highly qualified individuals that exist in the business. Most of the guys I work with, I've worked with for 22 years, which is fairly unusual. So with Jpmorgan, we formulated a plan. That plan was then executed, and it was Jpmorgan, I'm sorry, it was Chase Manhattan. We executed Chase's plan. That was to move from 55 Water into a brand new building in Newport City. Lefrak was the landlord. It was a 1.2 million square foot development, 2 buildings, and we executed a 600,000 foot lease with Edward Minskoff at 1166 Avenue of the Americas. And those were our 2 touch point consolidation points. Almost 9,000 jobs migrated to Tampa and Houston as part of this process. And within 3 weeks after finishing, we get a call from Chase, from Mark Shapiro, to go over and see him. And he tells us, which he couldn't tell us before, obviously, that they have just purchased Jpmorgan. And they need to reconsolidate the investment bank. And they need to understand what the options are for Midtown and for downtown. Another analytic study, new development was involved, what's available, all the things that work, because obviously the timing on this, again, was critical. Net, we came up with, during the course of our due diligence, the ability to build downtown, obviously, we modeled that out. That would be a building contiguous to 60 Wall, or Midtown. And the major option in Midtown we developed during the course of that 2 months while we're doing the analytics was the Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette lease at 277 Park. And the reason why that option became apparent was we were representing MetLife in their move to Queens. We knew MetLife would have 1 million square feet of availability. We had done a lot of work for Credit Suisse in the past. So it was a very simple matter of seeking out Credit Suisse's opinion on whether it makes sense to consolidate Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette down to the 1 Madison Avenue. And after a series of negotiations, which Credit Suisse did okay by, because they were paying only $40 a foot for the lease at 277. It was done at the depths of the market. The lease was assigned to Jpmorgan, the new Jpmorgan entity. They moved to 1 Madison. 60 Wall was brought up and consolidated the investment bank into 277 Park, which then created the campus. Simultaneously, and we didn't represent JP on this, simultaneously JP took 600,000 feet from Bear Stearns at 245 Park, 277, 245, 270, thus the campus.
Created the campus, right.
They created a great campus for themselves. Net, while this was going on there, they've emptied 60 Wall. 60 Wall was a $1 billion build. Fabulous building, absolutely.
One of the newest buildings had been built in Lower Manhattan.
It was spectacular. 1.6 million square feet. We approached Deutsche Bank, who we represented for 2.5 years, trying to figure out a consolidation play. We were the first ones with Deutsche Bank at One Bryant Park talking to Durst. We were the first ones. We came up with the Penn Plaza situation with Vornado. We went to them and looked at the land maps, and you can ask David Greenbaum. During the course of all this, the numbers were obviously in the billions. This building becomes an opportunity. It's a major move for DB to go from Midtown to downtown. First time it was ever done in my history. We looked at the building.
Major move, because people really, you know, to go downtown, it wasn't.
It's the first major move. Now, if Condi completes its mission,
it'll be the next.
It'll be the next. But DB was clearly the first, and at 1.6 million, it'll be the biggest. But net, what happened is that the Seth Waugh, who's currently still the CEO, made a decision with his team. We went in, we entered negotiations with Jpmorgan, representing Deutsche Bank. Jpmorgan represented themselves with their bankers. And we effectuated a purchase of $630 million. It was a win-win for both sides. And just as a footnote to that, we sold 60 Wall to Paramount for $1.25 billion 2 years ago. So
it was a good deal for everyone.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the family. You have a son in Notre Dame who plays lacrosse.
Yes, he's a senior.
Who's a senior who this year worked at Blackstone?
Worked at Blackstone, and he's worked at C.B.R.E. for a number of years as well. He's been at it for 5 years.
And you have two daughters in high school?
Twin daughters, and they're both seniors, obviously.
So would you like your son or the girls to join the real estate business because it's been good for you?
You know what? I think it's up to them at the end of the day. I think my job is to give them the exposure, should they choose to want it, of looking at the various options. My son has had 4 years of exposure at C.B.R.E. and exposure at Blackstone. So he's equipped, he's a senior in college, he's equipped to make a decision, investment banking, real estate, which way he wants to go, you know, or writing. You know, you have to make your own career choice.
I think the great comment that you made when we got together a couple months ago was that you enjoy going to work every day. You really...
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. You enjoy it. But you know what? This challenge has been a good challenge.
It's
you know,
been a great
the kid from Queens who moved to Hempstead,
yeah,
who then was up in Buffalo, you've truly been a builder of New York, and I'd like to thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, LLC, Beechwood Organization, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, the Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Stephen Napolitano, First American Title Insurance Company, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns & Gian Tomasi, Grubb & Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa & Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Markham LLP, Marcus Millichap Real Estate Investment Services, Margolin Weiner & Evans LLP, Massey Knackle Realty Services, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Moynihan Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides & Associates, Sterling & Sterling, Urban American, the Wickoff Group.